So, welcome to day 3 of Honey Advent. And today, one of my favorite honeys. This is a Sidr honey from Abdullah in Yemen. Now, many people who are interested in honeys have heard that Yemeni honey, and particularly their Sidr honey, is meant to be the best in the world. And whenever anybody claims to have the best honey in the world, I'm curious. And it's not very easy to travel to Yemen. It's somewhere I've always wanted to go to. And when in Oman, I was really keen to go to the border of Yemen where they have the frankincense trees because I wanted to see the frankincense trees with the bees on them, and that would have been lovely. But with both my husband and son in the military, or Greg was military, they were not recommending and certainly not happy that I would go to that part of the world. However, having met lots of people from all these dangerous hotspots in the world, I think if you know people, you could probably be okay. Anyway, so I didn't get to go there. But in 2023, I was invited to speak in Saudi Arabia. And it was amazing going there. And I flew into Riyadh and then got a flight down to Al Baha, which is in the mountains in the southwest of Saudi Arabia and actually quite near Yemen. And during this conference that I was speaking at, where they kept calling me a doctor, and I kept saying, "No, I'm not a doctor," but they kept saying, "Oh, Dr. Paula, Dr. Paula." Um, there was a big honey festival as well. Sorry, I'm just going to have to. And I went down to the honey festival, and in my book, Spiritual Beekeeping, I talk about that because, again, it's not just a simple walk down to the honey festival. And I was looking at all the different honeys, and there was hundreds of honeys. There was a big Chinese room, so it's where I got the Tibetan honey. And most of the people there were wearing the white gowns that they wear in the Middle East. And then this guy came around with a brown one on, and he stopped and looked at me. And I was, there weren't any other Western women there. In fact, I don't think there were any other Western men. There was Turkish and further east, but nobody, nobody else. There was quite a lot of Chinese and Middle Easterns there. Anyway, so this chap, he stops and he looks at me and he goes, "Oh, where are you from?" And I said, "Oh, I'm from England." And he was like, "Wow." So I said, "Wow, well, where are you from?" And he said, "Yemen." And I went, "Wow, how cool is that?" And I said, "Is it true that you have the best honey in the world?" And he was like, "You've heard that we have the best honey in the world." So I said, "Well, yeah, but is it true? I've not tried real Yemeni honey." So then he said, "Right, I will come and see you tomorrow." So he came to the hotel where the main conference was the next day, and he had this little zip up bag, and he had 5 of these. This is one of them. And you'll see the photograph on the picture for today's advent. They were all different colors, different shades of sort of amber, so going really dark into really light. So I looked at him and I said, "Well, which one's Sidr?" And he's like, "They're all Sidr." And I'm like, wow, this is incredible. So we had an amazing time where I tasted all the different honeys. He told me about where they all came from. And it was fascinating because each city had a different color. And I suppose it's, even though it's a cedar tree, you've got different soils, you've got a different environment. And so it would impact this. But the question I really wanted to ask him is because nearly all the honey suppliers at the exhibition, who were from Saudi Arabia and Oman and the UAE, they all had Sidr honey. And I tried Omani Sidr honey before, so I was familiar with what Sidr tasted like. And I was tasting theirs, and I've got Sidr in my collection, and there was nothing that really blew me away. I just thought, yeah, it's okay, but it's not a wow honey. You do eventually get to a stage where you become a bit more fussy about what honeys you collect. And and then when I tried his, every single one was wow, wow, wow. It's it's like the essence of Sidr that you pick up in honey. This is just 10 times. So I said, "So why is Yemeni Sidr honey so much better?" And the reason is that their trees are bigger and older, which means they've got more flowers, And it means that the bees, if you've got a hive underneath a Yemeni cedar tree, it doesn't need to go anywhere else. So it's actually a much higher proportion of cedar in the honey. Whereas the other parts of the Middle East, it's going to be a bit of cedar and then a mixture of mountain plants and whatever else is available. So a bit like the manuka, where you get the different grades depending on whether the bees forested from other forage from other plants. It's the same with cedar, and obviously an older tree, a bigger tree, is going to have more flowers. So then the bees don't need to go anywhere else. So I have still got a sense of smell, thankfully. Now that is interesting because it's quite a sort of a stale socks smell. And I don't think I've ever described it like that before. I've never really thought of how to describe it, but this is the first time I've taken the lid off for a long time, and I'm like, wow. It is a really dry, even like a camel, a dusty camel skin. It just has not an appealing aroma, apart from when you know what it's gonna taste like, and then you get really excited, your mouth starts watering. So, the other thing that's quite characteristic about cedar honey is it's quite tacky. It sort of strings and sticks. It's not, um, it hasn't crystallized, but it is quite tacky, a bit like cow gum. When I was at art school, you'd have cow gum. So it's just really stringy and quite hard to separate. So I've got a big dollop so I don't have to double dip. Right. Mm. So even having half a spoon is hard because it strings. So it sort of stays together, but not like a jelly. It is more, gosh, what is it like? Um, oh, I can't name. But yeah, it does sort of stick as a globule. And so whereas some honeys, you put them in your mouth and as they dissolve, they just melt and go everywhere. This doesn't. It stays as like a glob together. Mm.
It's a bit like when you have glucose syrup, like when you're baking or wanting to
Mm.
stick it to another bit of chocolate and you have glucose syrup and it stays very gluey and and like a sort of a it's like a sort of a squishy ball of wax almost in your mouth.
It's really unusual for a honey. And then the taste, again, it's a really difficult one to describe because it's not like anything else. And this one has a slight warming, like a burning afterwards. This is one of the darker ones. Mm. So you're expecting caramel, and perhaps there is a bit of caramel, but then it is this. I liken it to Play-Doh. Not that I ever ate Play-Doh, but that smell of Play-Doh from the
Marzipan.
1970s. Yeah,
Yeah.
so it is sort of marzipan-y, but it's not sweet like marzipan until you start to swallow it, and then you get more of a burnt sugar. So it's it is such an addictive honey. When you've had a good cider, it's like nothing else. Now, what's also interesting is we've all heard about Manuka being the medicinal honey. Now, I believe that all honeys will have a medicinal property, or most honeys would have medicinal properties because most plants do. And if the bees have harvested plants to self medicate, which we know they do, then there's a good chance that the honey is going to have some medicinal properties. But to test for medicinal properties is very expensive and a tricky process. But also to give one honey any kind of medical recognition, you've got to be able to repeat it. You've got to know that all the honeys with that floral imprint have the same medicinal properties. And with Manuka, because it's this wild plant that grows all over New Zealand, you can have hundreds and hundreds of beekeepers that will have a similar product where the bees are just foraging from Manuka. So it makes it easier to say, oh yeah, Manuka has these properties. Now, there's two other honeys in the world that have been tested to the same level and proven to be medicinal. And one of them is Sidr. The other one is from Madagascar and it's called Niuli, which is a really mushroomy honey. And I've used that before in my honey advents. But So Sidr has a lot of value in the Middle East because they know it's medicinal. I believe they did the test because when Manuka became all famous and had the medicinal honey in the world, in the Middle East, they knew that their honey was medicine. And the reason they know it is because you have that high proportion of Muslims in the Middle East. And in the Quran, there's a whole chapter called the bee. And in that chapter, Allah tells us that you can go and put hives in the mountains and the trees and where the bees choose. And from their bellies emerges a fluid of diverse colors, which is healing for the people. So in the Quran, it says that honey is medicine. And so it is treated as medicine, it is sold as medicine, it is revered as medicine. And this is why honey is so special in those parts of the world. And, it's wonderful that they acknowledge that. And so it's sold at that rate. You won't get cheap honeys in supermarkets there. It is sold in quite large pots normally, but it is sold at its good value. So it's far more expensive than honey would be here. Excuse me. So there you go. That's some Sidr honey. But look, you can see how slow it is to move. And I'm sure that this Sidr honey is going to really help me with my sore throat and my cold.
Yeah.
But yeah, it coats the glass. What's the word for that, Kirsty, when it coats?
Oh, I don't know. Would you say very viscous?
Yeah, there's another word, but I can't remember what it is. Um,
That's all that's coming to my mind. It's very late in the.
I
That,
know.
that, that jar reminds me of a Marmite jar from the two flat sides.
Well, quite possibly it was once. But this chap is really interesting because I felt bad that he gave me these 5 pots of honey, and I was like, I was doing that thing of just feeling guilty for being given something by somebody who comes from a war-torn country and probably has far less than I do. But this guy has been on television all around the world. He's got millions and millions of followers on his YouTube, and he's one of the biggest honey producers in Yemen. So he's like a really top guy. So I'm really excited that I've got some of his honeys. And one of them I gave to Emre from Apime Hives because he's a honey judge as well, and he really loves his honeys. And I said to him, "You've got to try this honey. This is amazing honey." And he too was like, "Wow, this is good stuff." So there you go. If you want the best Yemeni honey, you need to go to Abdullah, and I will find his details and share him in the group. I think I'll try and find some of his YouTube and put that in there. But Facebook, we're friends on Facebook, but it took quite a challenge to actually make a friend with him because Facebook was like, "How on earth do you know somebody from Yemen?" But
But
yeah,
do you know whereabouts in the Yemen that one came from?
not this actual one.
Uh,
Oh, actually, yes, I do because I've got a number on it. This came from, is it Haman City? Which is an interesting city near the coast, but it's the oldest city in the world with skyscrapers, and they were made from sand. So if search for, I think it is Haman, Hamman, Haman City. So yeah, that's where that one comes from.
Fabulous. Did you speak to the people on the Yemeni stand at Copenhagen?
No, do you know? I
Oh,
just I just missed that whole thing.
oh, because I tasted the Sidr on the Yemen stand and I was absolutely blown away because I can't, hand on heart, I can't say it's my most favorite honey because it does have that awful animal pong, and that quite sometimes it can be quite a strong animal, earthy, mm, just a very earthy umami kind of taste. It's so savory, and it can feel oily in my mouth, and I don't always enjoy it. But the Yemen cider in Copenhagen was outstanding. It was just nothing like any other cider I had tried. So yeah, I'm glad I did because it was so floral and perfumed and really silky on the mouth rather than kind of greasy and oily.
Yeah,
The lady I spoke to there said if you were to ask for Yemeni honey. Try and ask for Sidr that's been harvested in the winter and that's come from either the Jardin or the Douane Valley. They are supposed to be the best areas, supposedly.
Wow. Oh,
But
brilliant.
but but how do we get it? I mean, it's almost impossible to access this stuff, isn't it? It's just really, really difficult.
It is, and so sad because it is, one of the world's greatest commodities,
Yes.
and, they have a real problem getting it out and for us to try it. But
Yeah.
yeah, it is amazing.
I think it's such a shame that the Middle East has so many wars, because um, what happens if all those lovely honey trees get destroyed? If something happens, and there's so much that you can't replace, and that can be destroyed by war, and that is a real shame.
Oh, I know. It's brutal. But I think this honey is good enough that
Mm.
to cause wars, actually, that if there was a reason, to sort of get the honey route, from these honeys, they are that good. Right, thank you. I'm gonna stop the recording now.